So all of those who have just joined us on the internet, my name is Erin Chan, and I'm the MC for today's event. This afternoon, we will be listening to two presentations. The first one is a panel discussion made up of young leaders and all Canadians who are involved in their community in different ways.
Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Fareed Ahmed, co-host of the Halifax Youth Forum on Immigration and Diversity. There will be two presentations this afternoon. The first is a panel discussion with emerging Canadian youth leaders and activists already representing Canada internationally and in a variety of different ways. The second will be a series of rapid-fire reports from the youth workshops summarizing the main ideas from their discussions earlier this morning. We encourage online participants to feed their reports back to us during this session so we can plan to incorporate them into the session. Webcast participants can send questions and comments by following these steps. First, click the participate button on the webcast player, enter your email address, and finally write your questions in the space provided and press send. Alternatively, you can send your feedback following your breakout sessions or feedback to the questions we posed to our dedicated email, forum150@experiencescanada.ca. It is now my pleasure to introduce once again Deborah Morrison, who will moderate this afternoon's panel presentation.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to get right to it. We have some fantastic panelists, and the first thing I'm going to do is present each of them to you. They're each going to speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to have questions and answers from the audience. So the first person I'd like to present is Leen Al-Zaybak. Leen is a leader in supporting the success of Syrian refugees resettled in Canada and abroad. As both co-founder and director of Jasur, an international NGO that helps Syrian youth continue their education through scholarships and mentorship, Leen currently serves on the board of Lifeline Syria, an initiative to help sponsor and settle 1,000 Syrian refugees in the Greater Toronto Area. She presently serves as a senior policy advisor in the Office of International Relations and Protocol for the Government of Ontario. Welcome, Leen. Sarah Jama is a community organizer and recent university graduate. She has organized a number of events in Hamilton on racism, such as Rise Up, Rally Against Police Brutality, and was a co-organizer of Hamilton's first anti-racism action initiative. She served a 2-year term as the Ontario Director of the National Educational Association of Disabled Students and founded MACCESS, the first peer-based and run service for students with disabilities at McMaster University. She was recently featured on CBC Radio's The Current discussing disability activism in Canada. And finally, Ermias Nagatu. Ermias is a community leader and fitness enthusiast. He has volunteered with Pathways to Education for 5 years as a tutor and ambassador for marginalized youth in his community. Ermias was inspired to be more engaged in the capacity building while enrolled at York University. Ermias will be leading the cycling fundraiser Ride to Inspire with Fareed Ahmed, another youth ambassador and today's MC. They will be biking from Halifax to Toronto to raise thousands of dollars for community-based youth programming, infrastructure, and scholarships. We're now going to ask the panelists to have brief opening remarks so that you can get to know them better and spark some conversations. Leen.
First up. Thank you, Deborah. I'm honored to be here today with so many changemakers, activists, advocates, and leaders. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of Mi'kmaq, territory unceded. I say this always as a reminder that we, all, unless Indigenous, came from somewhere else. They say pictures are worth 1,000 words. Well, it could be said that the famous picture of Ilan Kurdi, the 3-year-old whose lifeless body washed ashore, was worth thousands of lives that were saved. Undeniably, the pictures of Ilan changed the domestic and international politics of the Syrian refugee crisis. Today, I'm very proud to say that since October 2015, Canada has welcomed over 45,000 Syrian newcomers into our beautiful country. I believe that the government policy of opening our doors and our hearts to those in need reflects our deeply held Canadian values. I'd like to quote Vincent Massey, the first Canadian-born Governor General. He said, Nations achieve character in crisis, and it is of such moments in history that nations seem to say to themselves, I live for something. For what? What do I value above all? We showed our highest values when we made Syria's crisis Canada's crisis. We showed that Syrian lives matter to us, as all lives matter to us. In doing so, we chose to value compassion. We chose to value kindness. And we chose to value justice. And while others have closed their doors to this population, it must be said that we chose to value diversity. As a Syrian-born Canadian, I want to tell you that these values are not uniquely Canadian values. In fact, they're universal, based on reason and empathy. Compassion, kindness, and belief in diversity transcend culture and nationality. Welcoming newcomers with open arms is a tradition we carry on from Canada's Indigenous peoples, who helped the first European arrivals on these shores adapt to life in these lands. We are a country of immigrants and refugees. And as the Prime Minister has said many times, we are strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. Syrian refugees have already made us stronger by affirming our national values. And in the years to come, their journey in this country will make our country stronger in practical ways. My own journey started when I came back from Syria, where I had moved after completing my master's degree in England. I was forced to come back to Canada because of the war. I didn't know what I could do to make a difference, but I knew I wanted to do something. I knew I had to do something. On your journey, I would urge you to remember that you're never alone. A few other Syrian expatriates and myself got together on Skype and decided to form Jusur, which means bridges in Arabic. While initially we wanted to do everything under the sun to help our beloved country, we decided to take a step back and ask, what area do we have the most power to impact? Where is the need the greatest according to those affected by the war? There was an overwhelming cry and demand from Syrian youth about their education, which was cut off brutally by the war. Students like you that were finishing their high school, others that were finishing their undergraduate degrees, sometimes just weeks away from graduating. So we decided to focus on education, because as fortunate individuals, we knew the power of education. And we also knew that we could not see a bright future for Syria without its youth leading it and having the tools like education to lead it. We started with a mentorship program and then formed partnerships with other universities and organizations that were also focused on students at risk. I got my motivation from the students themselves. I remember one student in particular. Her name was Inanna, who was finishing her undergraduate degree in pharmacy. I was mentoring her through our program, and she was in Aleppo, which, as some of you may know, is one of the hardest hit cities in Syria. It's almost completely destroyed. After one of the first bomb attacks targeting universities, I frantically emailed her, concerned that if she was okay or not, if she was affected, because I knew she had been writing her exams that day. I got an email back that I will never forget. She said, "I'm doing just fine. The attack was very close, and it happened in a place where you should pass by to reach the university. It was the first day of our exams, and after we were handing in our papers, all we could hear was a plane getting very low and shooting, and the glass broke everywhere. It repeated after 5 minutes. It was terrifying. I don't know how to describe it. Now there is nowhere safe in Aleppo," she says. Imagine one of our friends was in his exams, and his parents, hearing about the bombings, were going to get him, and they got killed. We lost a lot of friends, and now our exams are delayed. But Lean, I don't know how to describe this. Aleppo was a very beautiful place. Now all you see is garbage, shooting, dead bodies, scared people. Everything is expensive, and people are sleeping in tents in the cold. Girls are getting married at a very young age so they don't get raped because they don't have anywhere to live. But Lean, you don't know how much I'm dreaming every day about an opportunity to continue my studies, especially since I only have a semester to go. Despite the bombs falling all around Inanna, she was determined that nothing could stand between her and her education. And I certainly was going to do all that I could do to help her get closer to that goal and that dream. Inanna, I'm happy to report, went on to get her master's and her PhD in England on full scholarship. To date, Jasur has provided over almost 500 scholarships and mentored over 600 students. We're also educating 3,400 Syrian refugee children in our schools in Lebanon. Our graduating students from university are being recruited by the top companies, and they are now the breadwinners for their families and helping to bring them over to safety. As Canadians, we have seen thousands of Syrian refugees come to Canada. You may even have some in your school. I would encourage you to learn from them and understand the journey they have taken to make it here. They bring with them a rich culture, history, experiences, and perspective that can help us here with the challenges and problems we are facing. The hard work really started the second they got here. It is not easy being a newcomer. You're starting your life from scratch, sorry, one sec. You're having to leave your country behind. We have to ask ourselves, are we adding to their hardship, or are we setting them up for success? What barriers can you, here in this room and online, help to take down? What elements of our system can you change for the better? Not only for our recent newcomers, but for others who will follow them. At Jasur, we started as volunteers. We all had and continue to have full-time jobs. Our board meetings were online through Skype, and we communicated through email. I want to tell you, or encourage you, not for a second to think that to affect global change, you have to be abroad. You can be in your own backyard, changing the lives of people thousands of miles away. It might sound odd to hear, but I think I was able to help more from Toronto than if I had stayed in Syria. You also don't have to choose between local and global change. Do both. Through Jasur, I was involved in the global, and then when the opportunity came through Lifeline Syria to act local, I rolled up my sleeves once again. As youth, you all have the most important role to play as change makers. You don't see barriers or borders to a problem. You see solutions. My advice to you is to build bridges in a world that is building walls. Continue to build bridges to every community you can reach. It's not about helping others or teaching others. It's about creating connections, growing relationships for a better and stronger world. Remember, a bridge is a two-way street. I never thought of my volunteer work as something that can lead me elsewhere. I saw a need, I saw the opportunity to help, and I rolled up my sleeves. I rarely said no. Today, I'm fortunate to work in the Office of International Relations for the Government of Ontario as a policy advisor, working on such files for the province as international relief, refugee resettlement, and agreements with other subnational and national governments. I could never, however, do the work I'm doing today without the volunteer work and experience that I gained with the two organizations. In closing, I want to share one last story with you. Last year, I visited a Syrian family who recently arrived to Canada through the private sponsorship program. I had the pleasure to meet their two adorable young daughters. Naham, the youngest, is only 4 years old. And that's the same age I was when I came to Canada. It was really incredible to look into Naham's eyes and see pure happiness reflected there. I knew that she would have the same opportunities that I had when I was her age. I believe there will be a bright future ahead for Nahum, and that's because of hundreds of Canadians who opened their hearts and their homes to her. As a Syrian, I'm horrified at what is happening in my country of origin. But as a Canadian, I'm so incredibly proud of our willingness to welcome and support another wave of newcomers. This is the Canada that I know, that I love. This is the Canada that I know we all want to build for generations to come, one with the strength to uphold our values. Thank you very much.
So this is a forum on diversity and inclusion of every kind. So thank you, Lean, for your great conversation about refugees and immigration. And now we're going to turn it over to Sarah Jama.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I'm actually from Hamilton, Ontario, but I'm super excited to join you all today. Halifax is a lot more similar to Hamilton than I thought it would be. Today I kind of want to talk to you all about what it means to get involved in activism and to organize. Because I remember being in high school and not feeling as though I could get involved in a lot and make actual tangible change that I could see. So I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am, how I got started, and what that kind of means for all of you. So like I said, I'm Sarah. I was born with cerebral palsy, which is like, if you've ever watched Breaking Bad, it's the same disability that Flynn has with the crutches, except, okay, I'll stop. But yeah, basically it's a developmental disability. I was raised with by a single mom in Toronto, Ontario. I'm the youngest in my family. Growing up in school, I never really felt like I fit in, to the point where I remember being in school and I would get severely picked on because I was different. I was a vocal Black woman with a visible disability. So I would get things thrown at me. The teachers would say that I was making things up. I was called a liability when I asked to go on school field trips. So I was completely pushed out. I didn't really feel, though, that the barriers that I was facing were more than individual. I thought all the struggles that I faced were just mine, because I was the only one around me that I could see with a physical disability. I didn't really know what systemic injustice was until I got to grade 10 and I met this kid named George. He wanted to go to Etobicoke School of the Arts, but it didn't have an elevator, so he didn't apply. And it was a public school. So in my mind, I was completely frustrated. I was like, what do you mean that they don't have an elevator for this public school? You want to be an actor and you can't apply? So I got really, really frustrated. So I would get on a bus and head to the Special Education Advisory Committee of the TDSB. And my second time giving a delegation, the chair, Chris Bolton, I still remember his name, he laughed at me. He said, "Who do you think you are? What are you doing here? And what gives you the right to speak to us?" And he was the chair of this committee that was supposed to speak for students in the Toronto District School Board with disabilities. At that point, I started to realize that a lot of the barriers that I faced were systemic. They were larger than just me. There were issues out there and systems in place that prevented people who were different from accessing certain resources, not because of who they are, but because of the world not wanting to be inclusive. So I told myself at that point, if I ever saw something like that again, I wouldn't just be silent. I would get up and I would do something about it. So when my teachers would say, "You should be in the college stream, you're not smart enough to go to university," I just kind of ignored it, worked hard in school, and then got accepted to McMaster University. My first year there, I was signed up to take a math class. The math class was also not accessible, and at the time I had to use a power chair because the campus was so large I physically couldn't get around. So I did what I was told to do. I was told to go to the student accessibility office and say, "Hey, I can't get into my class that I'm paying for, what do I do?" The prof told me, "Oh, I've taught in this class for years, I don't want to switch rooms." So again, I'm doing what I'm told to do. I'm following the systems that are set up in place to advocate for me, and I'm realizing that they don't work. Eventually, after weeks of advocating, the dean of students had to talk to the prof, and he actually he went into a different classroom, but he was putting up a fight. So you know what? I said, screw this, I'm going to try to fix this on my own. I ran for a student representative assembly and got elected by the skin of my teeth. My mom actually helped me put up my posters around around the school, that I was the only one to be elected on a platform around accessibility. And I was able, through a lot of advocacy and work, to write the first accessibility policy for the McMaster Students Union, and to create a service called MAccess that would help students figure out how to advocate who had disabilities for students with disabilities, so that they wouldn't have to go to places like student accessibility services that are run by people who don't understand what it means to have a disability. Instead, they can come into a space and learn how to advocate for themselves and what their rights are. Fast forward to my last year, I joined the McMaster Womanist, because what I found was, although I was passionate about an issue, I was sort of being boxed into an issue. All of a sudden, people thought I only cared about one thing, access. But there are a lot of different intersectional ways that your identity and who you are can present barriers to accessing your right to live and your right to access. So I started to learn more about racism in Hamilton. Hamilton has some of the highest hate crimes in Ontario, and that's not really talked about. We even had a city councillor, the first black city councillor, Matthew Green, get carded just for waiting at a bus stop, and he was a councillor there. So there were a lot of issues around racism that I wanted to learn about and get involved with, so I joined the McMaster Womanists and became president. Womanism is a concept basically that tries to take an approach to feminism that's more inclusive and intersectional to black women. So at the time when women were fighting for the right to vote, black women were also not able to vote because they were black and women. So it was like a double whammy, I guess. But I also liked the Womanists because they talk a lot about intersectional issues. So I felt like I wasn't confined into a box. So at that point, the Minister of Anti-Racism in Ontario was going around to each city and hosting anti-racism directorates that were meant to have dialogues around racism. But what I found was his anti-racism directorate conversation that happened in Hamilton happened completely far from gentrified, racialized communities. It was up what we call the mountains, so really far. It wasn't downtown, it wasn't accessible, it was in a strange space with a lot of weird power dynamics. It wasn't run by youth, it wasn't run by racialized people, really. It didn't really feel inclusive. So the McMaster Womanists said, okay, how do we fix this? So we ended up hosting our own sort of directorate called the Anti-Racism Action Initiative, where instead of asking people what their experiences were, we asked them to come up with solutions and actual policy change. You see, one of the things I notice about conversations that people have is you're often asked to relive your experiences and your trauma, but you're not really asked to come up with solutions. So when we hosted that, the community was really surprised because 250 people came out, which was double the minister's event. We did this on a student budget, and also half of the people who came were under the age of 30, showing that people actually give a damn about getting involved in politics. Contrary to the fact that oftentimes in high school or in university, we're told that, students don't really care, we just want to make a buck and get out. So I guess I say all this to say that in terms of getting involved, pick something that you're passionate about and work toward building coalitions. So I find the best way to make change is to never just work as an individual, because you're not one person who cares about one thing. There are people before you who have worked on Indigenous sovereignty, on issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever it is that you care about, accessibility. Find those people in your community, build your networks, and build coalitions. Some of the strongest sort of forms of advocacy that I have seen on my campus, or even in my community, have happened when the Indigenous community came together with the Black community to work together to run events. Actually, our event, I should say, was run by the McMaster Indigenous Community Alliance, the McMaster Muslims for Peace and Justice, and about 6 other coalitions, and the Engine Youth Center in the city. One of the biggest flaws I see in people starting to rise up in their activism or what they care about is you get so bogged down in the individualism that you feel like you're fighting the world. But if you just reach out to communities who are doing similar work, you'll find that it's very easy to make change and affect change. After our event with the Anti-Racism Action Initiative, the Minister of Anti-Racism actually called a meeting with us, drove to Hamilton, and said, hey, what are some changes that you want to see? because out of our event, we had 32 demands. So just by sticking to what we believed in and doing the work that we thought was right, people in power started to come to us. So always stick to your principles, don't chase power, build coalitions with people who are doing the work, reach out to marginalized communities, don't try to speak for people that you don't understand. And never let people tell you that because of your age, it's not possible for you to affect change. Did you know that most of the movements across the world, from like the South African apartheid to like present day BDS, have been fueled by student voices? And that's because what you're not told and what we're often not taught is that students have like the most autonomy in the activism world, because the institutions expect you to reach out of your comfort zone and to test your boundaries, and you're not really bogged down by as much of like the work world. It's your time to sort of test out what your boundaries are and what you believe in. And so that is why most of the movements across the world are fueled by people like you. So never let anybody tell you that you can or cannot do something or you can't affect change, I think. Because just from some of the small work that I've been doing, I've been able to see a huge amount of change in my campus alone, but also like the Hamilton community at large. So yeah, I think that's mostly what I wanted to say.
Great. Wow. So that's a whole new line of questions that I already have in mind, but I promised that I'd let everybody speak first, so we're going to move over to Armias Nagatu.
Yeah. Can you guys see the slide? Yep. Okay, I can't, sorry. I have one here. So just as Lean and Sarah have shared their personal stories, I'd like to do the same with you guys today. I think narratives are a great way to provide context and highlight themes such as inclusion and diversity. Did that work? No? There we go. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit about myself. I was born and raised.
This is like a trust
I will
system.
just. All right.
Are they working?
Oh. Oh, it is not working.
Not working?
Nope.
That's not the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Maybe if you stand in front of it.
Yeah. Is the PowerPoint there? Nope.
Can
Okay.
you guys do it if he just says next slide?
We don't know what slide he's looking for.
Okay.
Just went through them all.
Oh. Should be a photo of me.
You're a really good looking guy, but I don't have a picture of you.
All right, well, I can just do it without it, and I'll take a seat. So the first slide actually had a photo of myself and my puppy. And I was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, in Regent Park, one of the oldest social housing projects in Canada, and a very diverse community. I have a very strong passion for health, which led to me studying health sciences and co-founding a health and fitness app with many other good friends of mine this past year. But outside of work, I've been volunteering in Regent Park and the Moss Park community for over 10 years. And I've begun to really enjoy spending time building relationships in my community and also spending time with family and friends. And my puppy, who has an Instagram account, which I put up. But I wanted to also get into more of a background with my family. My mother immigrated to Canada in the 1980s from Ethiopia and worked very hard. She, as a newcomer, was able to get into the labor market, but unfortunately, a few years later, was diagnosed with a mental health disability. This led to many barriers as a newcomer with language, literacy skills, and understanding of the healthcare system to really receive quality healthcare. So growing up in Regent Park as the only child of a single mother, I observed how the social services came together as a patient, advocate, and a family caregiver for my mother. I developed this curiosity to understand disease I was inspired by the earliest form of treatment for my mother from her family doctor, which sparked a passion to go into medicine. And many of you may know to get into medical school requires the grades, the experiences, and the financial support. I didn't have any of those. I was in grade 9 with a big afro and a dream with very little support. And that's when the Pathways to Education program came to me. In grade 9, I signed up through this community-based program with financial, social, and one-on-one support. I was given help from a support worker. Her name was Saida, where she gave me bus tickets every day, provided me with ongoing support, and got me my first hospital internship at Toronto General and Mount Sinai Hospital. They provided me with ongoing scholarships throughout high school, and from there, I went to university. You would see a photo of my mom and I hugging each other, and also for Mother's Day. So after graduating high school, I went on to York University and finished my health sciences degree, and I confidently can say that Pathways to Education enabled me to be here standing today to say that I will be applying to medical school this fall, 2017, across Canada. But I also wanted to highlight that it's not just me in this story. Pathways is an inclusive program that puts the concept and practice into putting diversity into action by creating an environment of community involvement, education, respect, and many great connections. There are many other youth that I've met, amazing youth from the Pathways program, such as Brandon Murdoch of Fish River Cree Nation in Winnipeg. He's currently studying his Bachelor of Arts degree in the University of Winnipeg, as well as Nisita of Toronto, who completed her Bachelor of Computer Science, and over the past years has founded a program called Tula, and is working with me on an alumni committee at Pathways Canada. The next big thing I think you guys should be aware of is, after joining a community service such as Pathways or any other resources, it's also really important to give back. And I started that my undergrad by volunteering twice a week, tutoring the same youth in the same seat that I was tutored at. And from there, I developed this passion and this perspective that I wasn't limited. I wasn't just in the movies that people were able to do this. So I told my really good friend, Fareed, who you guys saw on stage, how about we bike across the country and raise money for this program and support more youth and empower them to be the capacity builders for generations to come. And that's where Ride to Inspire was formed. I connected with Pathways to Education, I connected with Experiences Canada, and many other resources across the city to make this happen. And this weekend, we'll be biking back to Toronto to raise $10,000 for our bike mentorship program. But it wasn't just the community resources that we were able to get support from. It was also across the country. I wanted to share with you guys a tip. Utilizing social networks is really important. I know you guys discussed that it may be harmful or promote social isolation, but it's also, on the other end of the spectrum, a great opportunity to meet other people who have done your passion, as Sarah said, these coalitions, and they can allow you to really, they can enable you to get your whatever project you'd like to do. And for me, that was going onto Facebook and finding this Biking Across Canada group where they shared all the Tim Hortons across the country and all the routes for pit stops and bike shops. And from there, we continued engaging in our campaign on Facebook and as well as Twitter, where we attended events with the MPP Glenn Murray, who retweeted us. And these small micro actions on social networks can allow you guys to really empower your projects from a grassroots level. And that's what I'd really like to share with you guys today. And I hope you continue this cycle of inspiration for as long as you live, and to Canada 200. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all three of you. So now we do have a few minutes for questions, and because we've got such a diverse range of topics and a very short amount of time, I'm going to encourage those that want to ask questions to come forward to the mics. You're familiar with the process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few questions at a time and then allow the panelists to answer them. So for those of you with questions, anybody want to come forward? Great. right, go ahead.
Hi. So you're all activists, you're all change makers. So in your opinion, which is the best way to make a change in your community or in Canada? Is it big changes, or is it like a small and continuous process?
As I said, we're going to just take a few questions and then let them answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so this one is more specifically for like about Syrian refugees. So,
That's fine.
right. So so you talked about how a lot of Syrian refugees already do have, like, to an extent, an education, but haven't necessarily finished their education. So I was just wondering if there are Syrian refugees that end up in a that do come to my city or anyone else's city and do join one of our schools. Do you think there's any possible ways on a larger scale that we can learn from them also? Because I'm sure the education system is very different. So basically just learn from them and try to share our education. And
Great. Thanks. We're going to take a couple more.
How would you, how to word it? How would you describe the best way to encourage youth with disabilities to grow, succeed, and make a change?
Okay, that's a pretty straightforward one.
If you weren't in Canada and you were in another country, what additional opportunities or obstacles do you think you would have faced in your missions? Thank you.
Okay, great questions, everybody. Who wants to start?
I'll take the question the young lady asked. For the Syrian newcomers in your school, I think you can definitely learn from them just by asking about their journey. I mean, I think a lot of people, and rightfully so, assume because it was so traumatic and so terrible that they don't want to speak about it. Obviously, you gauge their comfort level, but you know, it doesn't have to be about the war. You know, it can be about their life before. What the similarities that they see between the Syrian culture and the Canadian culture. What are they finding weird? What are they finding challenging or funny? I think with the education piece, it's a different system for sure, but they would greatly benefit from Canadians here telling them about the higher education system here. How do you get a hold of scholarships? What is the application process like? How are there people to go through the essay questions? Those are all such helpful things that you can provide them with, and you'd be surprised what you're going to learn along the way and benefit from yourself. But it's definitely just taking that first step and approaching them and offering your help and a listening ear, and it will be an adventure for sure. Thank you.
Should we just go down the road?
Cool. I'll start with the question of like local activism versus like global activism, or how should you scale your work? I'll say this: activism. There are many ways to be an activist. Like I know how to run an effective rally, an effective protest. I also know how to write effective policy, and I know when to do each thing. So first of all, it depends on what you're passionate about. Second of all, I would say try to start locally and build those connections in your main community, because there's a lot you can learn by the people around you who've done similar work, and also it's the fastest way to see tangible change. And also, you never know what big impact your small work in your local community can do. So for example, Black Lives Matter Toronto, I'll bring that up. When they protested at Pride, so I don't know if you guys all know, but they sort of like blocked, like in the summer, they blocked the Pride March and had a list of demands. That turned into a big deal, but it was a small act. Like, I was there, I was watching it. The protest only lasted like 20 minutes, but the aftermath and the effect of that was that, like, a couple weeks ago, the Pride organization decided to like acknowledge their demands. And so now Pride is going to be sort of changed to cater to people of color and people who want to attend Pride and feel more included. So that's just an example of how something that may seem small to you at the time can have like continuous growth and effect. Another piece of advice I would say is if you're going to do activism and you pick something that you're passionate about, try to never stay in the same place for too long. So for example, when I was doing a lot of disability activism on my campus, I started to move off campus and I became the Ontario Director of the National Educational Association of Disabled Students. But I also started to move away from student politics and campus work because I became the person that was known for doing disability rights stuff. And so whenever people on the student government or whatever had a question about disability rights, they would come to me and I would say, hey, wait, there's hundreds of us on this campus. Why do you think that I'm the only person that can speak to this? And what are the barriers that you're creating by just coming to me? So make sure that when you're doing activism, start small, pick what you're passionate about, and make sure you're roping people in with you so that when you're learning it, the people around you are learning the skills as well of like how to protest, what the best skills are, who to go to, who to network with. That's why I would say like start locally if you can and then build outward. The other question of, I think it was about disability activism. I don't remember the actual question. Do you remember the question?
Oh, it was how can you help advance the breakdown of barriers and how can others help?
How do you help to... so I guess it's just what I said. Figure out what the main issue is that you want to be like activist, like be an advocate around. Figure out what the barriers are, and figure out your tactics. So what is it that you're actually trying to change? And also try to find people around you with similar struggles. I'll always keep going back to coalition building because if you try to make change on your own, there are so many people that are ageist, that are going to say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're youth, right? But the more you have people in your circle, the faster you'll be able to figure out how to make effective change.
Yeah, we can take more.
All right, let's take some more questions. And Fareed or Aaron, can somebody check if there's anything online? I'll just start in the audience. Go ahead. Oh, did you want to answer? Sorry.
You go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to take more.
Okay.
Hi, people often talk about how education is key for to unlearn discrimination and all that sort of stuff. So in school I often talk about racism and then like homophobia and sexism and all that sorts of stuff, but people are like, oh, you're just getting too offended too easily. Oh, it's not that big of a deal, or like discrimination is inevitable and stuff like that. How do I deal with people that just won't listen and that just won't listen to what I have to say and people who won't learn, like they don't want to learn?
We're going to take a couple more questions first. Go ahead, over here.
In your opinion, what are some of the best resources we can give newcomers to Canada who are students and are trying to learn either English or French?
Okay. And one more over here.
I think that Canadians who have lived in this country for many years definitely have something to learn from you immigrants. How do you think that we can learn from them or from groups that we have ignored for centuries about diversity?
And because we only have one more person standing up, I'm going to ask for you to give your question too, please.
How can you encourage, for your comment about volunteering and giving back, how can you encourage youth to volunteer, and where's the best place for them to start?
Cool. I'll answer that. I think it can start really at a local level for that. And the age, there is no real limit. It could be starting off with families at a school fair at such a young age, until you get into the school environment. I believe the school environment promotes a very great opportunity to share your passions and be an activist for whatever it is you'd like to do. And from there, after establishing those networks, you could continue to expand outside of your community. I think connecting with other health centers or other service providers is the first step, and from there, usually their partners would be in other cities. For example, as you could be traveling across to a different city, and that would be a great incentive for youth to explore and travel, but also give back?
Can I take the question? So the question about what do I do when someone is saying my concerns are valid around discrimination? That's a tough one because that's happening a lot with like the Trump era. People feeling as though they can like, I don't know. I feel as though a lot of people are feeling more empowered to make people openly uncomfortable because of their differences. And it's difficult because throughout history we've seen this happen over and over and over again. So we're kind of alive in an interesting time where people are feeling threatened for being different, for being gay or disabled or racialized. Suddenly it's like you're walking around and you have this open sort of difference, and people, when you're targeted for it, people say, oh, you're making it up. Like, I'll give an example. Disability rights, people are like, oh, what's that? Like, that's not a thing. But one of the stats I always like to remind people of is 83% of women with disabilities in Canada are likely to be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. There's so many stats and things going on in Canada that people don't know because we don't want to acknowledge it, but it doesn't mean your experiences aren't true. But I would also say that it's not your job to try to change people's minds, because that's a lot of work on you as an individual. I think we're in a state and we're in a society where so much information is being thrown around that it's very easy to see. It's very easy to access information if you want it, and I wouldn't waste too much time trying to change people's minds. Rather, I would encourage you to find those people who understand your narratives and what you're going through and build coalitions with them, and figure out how to support each other and make changes with your own communities. So for example, when we hosted like the Interracism Action Initiative, we went around to different groups who had similar experiences, though it was different. Like the Indigenous group didn't really understand the full-on experience of like the Muslim group, but we still worked together to run this Interracism Initiative that had a turnout that was like huge for the Hamilton population. So realize that you're empowered not because of the people who have power giving you power, you're empowered when you decide to take it. So forget about those people who don't want to listen or who say you're being too sensitive, because really you're not. And it's not your job, I think, to change people's minds. It's the education system that's failing us, that's not doing that work for us. And I'll also say this, I learned a lot of what I know about these topics, not through school. I actually didn't really like school, but I finished my undergrad. I hated it. Most of what I learned was from being on the ground, doing grassroots work, and connecting with different communities around me. I think it's the education system around us that's failing us and not wanting us to have these conversations. I read somewhere online that like schools banned the show, talking about the show 13 Reasons Why, right? So oftentimes when people are uncomfortable with certain narratives, we're shut off. We're like, that doesn't exist. We can't talk about it here. It's unsafe. And so that gives room to the people who already have power. So people who think that you're being sensitive are often coming from families where like they're of higher class, they come from money, they don't understand like those kinds of financial struggles, or they're not racialized. They don't come from families where they can comprehend the struggles that you're talking about. And it should be the education system to educate people outside of that, versus it being an individual struggle on you. So I'll always say, remove yourself from the concept of this is an individual struggle to this is a systemic struggle, it's not my fault, I don't have to change this person's mind, but what can I do in my power to change that on a larger scale? Okay. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Lean, we're going to have you answer those two questions on immigration, and then we're going to take some online questions, and that's unfortunately all we're going to have time for.
Sorry, I talked a lot.
No, it's good. So I have to now remember the question. I think there was one on how do we help Syrian newcomers at school? What resources can we provide them with? I think language is one of the biggest barriers to newcomers, not only Syrians, when they come to Canada. So providing help with even after school homework help would be really beneficial. And it, again, doesn't have to be just one person. You can form kind of a coalition or a team for each subject that newcomer has, and just kind of do a study group, right? And it's not necessarily teaching that newcomer, but all of you are benefiting at the same time, and you're creating this support wraparound system around the newcomer that is really going to help them and feel accepted and part of the school system and have friends, and at the same time they're getting help with their schoolwork. So I think that's an easy way to be a huge life support for the newcomers. I can't remember the second question. I don't know who asked it. If you could just yell it out. Yes. Yeah, I think Sarah has hit on so many of the important ways that you can help. I think that one thing that struck me with the Syrian newcomers is that Canadians were so open with their compassion, their love, their wanting to help, just inviting the newcomers into their homes. And I really wish that we would show the same compassion and interest and passion to the Indigenous communities here that have been so marginalized and so ignored. And you're well aware of the history. If we could treat all our communities the same way, I think we would be a better country. And I think it starts with dialogue. I don't think we have enough dialogue. And I think, like you were saying, Sarah, even in these circles, speak about your experiences, but how about the solutions? And while experiences are very worthwhile, I think it's getting the perspective of those affected by these systematic discrimination is the most value that we can exchange. So reach out and understand more, learn about the experiences, but gain the perspectives that can not only help us with the solutions that problems they are facing, but other problems, right? Everything is so connected. You're not solving a problem in a silo, right? So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, I promised an online question, and then we're really going to have to wrap, so.
Okay, there are a lot of submissions, but this question's from Linda. Do you feel that the Canadian education system does an adequate job of teaching inclusion, acceptance, and cultural diversity?
Well, it's a good one.
Who wants to take it? I can go over it. I talk a lot.
Short answers, guys.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I'll say yes and no. I'll say yes because there are certain parts or regions of the country I feel like the education and curriculum is focused and the policies are really pushing for students to understand history and understand strong, important concepts of inclusion, immigration, diversity. But even today I learned that there are a few students here that feel like there are gaps and that those gaps can reflect funding issues, support at a higher level provincially. And I think that can present an opportunity for students to be an activist, to show that, hey, our school doesn't have a multicultural curriculum or an inclusive curriculum to really educate our youth on Canadian issues.
I would say yes. I think our education system is failing us. It's very Eurocentric. A lot of what I've learned, I've had to do self-teaching, even after going to attain a university degree. I don't think it teaches us what we need to know about conflict resolution. I don't think our education system does justice to Indigenous sovereignty and teaching that. And the atrocities that we've experienced here in Canadian soil. I don't think it does a good job of equipping us to understand our place in the global crises that are happening right now. I don't think it does a good job of even teaching us civics. I still really struggle to understand politics, the difference between what the federal government does, municipal government. There are many ways that our education system fails to teach us what our rights are as people who deserve to be included. And I don't know, about our histories. I never really had a person of color who was a teacher, and I'm from Toronto, Ontario. It's way more diverse over there. I always felt isolated from school systems, and I think we have to understand that the education system is created in such a way that we're raising people up to go back into communities and just focus on working and being productive. It's not really trying to teach you how to be an activist and find your voice. So you guys have to do that mostly outside of your educational system.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to let you know that the youth panelists are going to be staying after the youth presentation, so if you have more questions or just want to talk to them one-on-one, they'll be here. So please let's give a big round of applause.
So unfortunately, that is all the time we have. This day is going by far way too quickly. At this time, I would like to invite Tina Keloa, Sheva Schwartz, and Paul McComber, to present our fabulous speakers with a thank you gift on behalf of the forum.
Oh, that's so nice.
Pour notre dernière séance,
our last session, we would now like to offer you an opportunity to discuss ideas presented during the day. During each workshop, a person was chosen to be the spokesperson for that group, and we would invite these people now to come to the stage.
Groups and participants, which we will intersperse between the presentations from the groups here in Halifax. I'd like to invite those youth selected in their workshops to speak on behalf of their groups to come forward to the stage to speak so that the online viewers also have a chance to see them. If there is time left at the end, we will of course invite comments and questions. So if you can make your way up. Line up 1, 2, 3, 4. Who's group 1? We'll go in order. So the first group can go ahead.
so start with your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Abigail and I'm from Nunavut.
Bonjour, mon nom c'est Claudia et je viens.
I'm Claudia from Quebec.
Talk about cultural diversity and technology use. We realize that most youth are not educated about technology. It has the ability to distort the truth, and our perceptions of a person or a situation change. We cannot control what others post, but we can educate them about the safe use of technology, to open their eyes and to realize that these dangers are real and affects not only them, but others as well. We can encourage parent involvement and educate them about the dangers of technology that their child may be facing. And we can also reduce the exposure of technology to younger individuals. There is so much more we could do with your help. It is fun, technology, and it allows us to create relationships, but we must learn to use it wisely, educate ourselves, and educate others as well.
Now,
I want to speak about cultural diversity. During our discussions, we were able to realize that Canada is an open country and that it's on the right path with all the programs it offers. However, nothing is ever perfect. It's always possible to improve and to change things. And so what we have decided to say is that we think Canada should work at being more open, supporting citizens in working together. We all have our culture and cultural baggage, and we could make something better out of it at the end. It's also important to learn from each other in order to be able to evolve. And in order to continue working on being more open, to reduce fear, and to help Canada move toward the future. We noticed that many programs were available, but that most of them were not well known by citizens. And so if people want to get involved to help new arrivals and refugees to become more settled, they don't know where to go or what to do to help them. And at the same time, if Canadians hope to travel and discover other cultures throughout the world, often it takes money and then means to do so. And it's not always possible for everyone to do that. So for most people in the middle class can't become involved in these programs, and the parents are going to push and allow them to become involved in these programs. So there's a lack of accessibility to these travel programs, and we think that we should encourage people to take the first step toward each other. It's difficult to do that, but it's things that step moves people forward. In conclusion,
And it applies to everything we do.
Yeah, and the education, it's part of the parent job and the government job, so it's why we think that everyone should do his part about it to have a better future.
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Reem and I'm from Ottawa, and I was in group number 2. So I think that something that was said by one of the students that best summarizes what we talked about was people are scared of the dark because they do not know what is there. And I think that that best summarizes the idea that education is key for us to promote cultural diversity, and I'm going to go by question on what we talked about. So the first question was about cultural diversity and how we have like positive impacts in Canada, and that the United States, in contrast, is kind of like a melting pot. And we were asking ourselves, why is that? Like, how do we achieve that as a country, as Canada? And we talked about the fact that like legislation in Canada promotes diversity. We have holidays, we have festivals that promote these cultures. We have representatives in the Senate that are quite diverse, and we like promote LGBTQ rights, for example. But that isn't enough because there are still barriers to this diversity. We talked about gender equality and how like quotas in organizations and in the government are not enough because simple images are not enough, and that if these people don't have resources, then it's not necessarily equality. We talked about feminism and how there's like misrepresentation that leads to extremes in social media, and that these extremes also fall under like religious extremes that then create things such as ISIS, and that's problematic, and that we need to make sure that people are educated on these specific issues in the right way. La deuxième question portait sur la...
the second question dealt with globalization and employment. We dealt with the issue of Canada, and we concluded that we should be working first and foremost on Canada before we start looking outside of Canada. So we need more opportunities, we need more jobs, and many more workshops in opportunities in Canada to promote work, but recognize the qualifications and the degrees from people who come from elsewhere to eliminate the prejudices that we have of them when they come to ask for jobs. And we gave the example of someone who was working as a taxi driver, but who was a lawyer in a previous country, and his diploma wasn't recognized. You have to eliminate these barriers.
How we need to work on structural change, but that it's a social and an institutional problem as well, and that they are tied in, and that politicians and legislators who have like closed minds and racist views harm individuals who are vulnerable and harm these power structures that are in place, and that we need to promote cultural awareness, and education is like a very powerful tool in this case. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mira. I'm from Winnipeg.
Hi, I'm Tina, and I'm from Lethbridge.
A lot of what our group discussed was how school atmosphere and the diversity and the culture we see integrated into our lives and where we are most often seen in our school is what is most important to us, because if we have culture in our schools, it will help the sustainability of our country overall in our community.
And schools also need to provide resources for students who might not be at the same advantage as the higher class. So it's important for them to feel included, but also to have that opportunity to step forwards.
We discussed a lot about how to welcome immigrants into Canada and create enough resources for them and make our communities a good, strong environment. We talked a lot about creating cultural diverse societies and how that is so important for Canada and how we have already achieved that, but how to bring it into the lives of every single person.
Acceptance was a really big key in this because for a diverse society to work, everybody needs to accept others and to live harmoniously without trying to push our views onto someone else, whether we come from a different place or we believe in different things.
And lastly, we talked a lot about social media usage and how to implement that in a positive way to society and how to bring ourselves into the community through social media, how to make pages and get involved in our school and day-to-day activism and activism groups within our community, and using social media for a positive change and using it for positive reinforcement and not using it as a negative place to use and feel comfortable with too much confrontation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Lily and I'm from Edmonton. Our group discussed a lot about social media and technology, and we talked a lot about how it can create positive impacts but also negative impacts and ways we can optimize the positives and minimize the negatives. So starting with the positives, social media and technology brings the world closer together, and it connects individuals and groups across the globe in social or entrepreneurial interaction that without technology wouldn't be possible. It gives us the opportunity to learn about different cultures on the other side of the world without actually visiting that country. And learning about these different cultures in such an accessible way creates nothing but positive impacts. The knowledge gained by learning about other cultures helps eliminate the fear of the unknown that unfortunately exists in so many people. Cultural education is so important, especially for kids and youth, and this education is easy with social media and technology. So for example, things like twinning schools from different countries. So if we take a school from Halifax and you twin it with a school in, say, India, and they hold video calls and stuff, and they teach each other about their different cultures. And this is incredibly beneficial to our global community. Another thing we discussed was how social media can help people who feel marginalized or isolated. So media sites like Twitter or Instagram provide a platform for millions of people to support an individual or group of people who may be going through a crisis. As an example, we talked about the I'll Ride With You hashtag that went viral after Muslim women felt afraid to ride on the train alone. A sense of unity and togetherness was created, which helped these women feel like they weren't alone in their suffering. There's also negative impacts that we should take action in striving to eliminate here in Canada. One of these that we discussed in our group was fake news. So news sites that spout fake news negatively influence the way people, and especially young people, think and see the world and their future actions as a result. We believe that education is key to minimizing these negative impacts, and in the case of the fake news issue, educating youth about what sites can and can't be trusted would really help. So in conclusion, social media and technology creates opportunities, empathy, and understanding, and though it has a potential to harm our society, these negative impacts can be eliminated and with the education and leave behind a more connected and unified global world. Thank you.
So I'm just going to jump in here with a few responses from online. So here's one from Kulmahak. I believe Canada does an exceptional job at celebrating all cultures and making people feel welcome to the country. For example, when I immigrated to Canada, I was very surprised to see signs in Punjabi at the airport, which is my first language. This simple thing surprisingly made me feel more welcome in this foreign place. However, sometimes I feel that the huge focus on diversity in Canada might create a division among cultures instead of unity. I believe we should instead focus on things that make us similar instead of different. Yet, I feel proud of my country when I see how many Syrian refugees our country takes in and the steps it takes to integrate them into Canada. I feel proud of the fact that our country celebrates Aboriginal culture and attempts to reconcile with them, something many countries around the world can learn from. All right, let's go to our next one.
Hi, my name is Rita, and I'm from Surrey, British Columbia, and I was in Group 7. So in Group 7, we discussed that Canada is very different from other countries in the way that here we can be something else and Canadian. We don't have to limit ourselves to being just Canadian or just from here. We can celebrate that we came from a different country or a different culture or a different religion, and although we did come from somewhere else, we're still Canadian, and we can celebrate the differences that lie there. We realize that we can celebrate and learn from our differences instead of hiding them or being ashamed of them. We realize that we don't have to forget our our background or the paths that we came from. But we can also come here all together from the different areas of the world that we came from and come together as one as Canadians. We realize that Canada has been doing a great job of welcoming newcomers. However, we don't appreciate them as much as we can. We welcome them in and we give them safety, but we don't realize that they're people with an education, or they're people with experiences, they're people with knowledge that we can learn from. We realize that we should acknowledge their PhDs. We realize that we can acknowledge the hardships that they've faced, and not only accept them, but celebrate them. Because we realize that differences and experience and knowledge are an asset to Canada, not a liability. We realize that by newcomers coming here and not being able to fully use the education that they have or use the knowledge that they have, they can become discouraged, and that's something that we need to work on to make sure that they understand that they're people and that everything that they can bring to Canada is something that we can celebrate together. Some of the most crucial steps in working towards a more inclusive and diverse Canada is better communication between people affected in these situations and individuals at the administrative level. For example, instead of assuming how someone might feel, as Sarah mentioned, instead of assuming how someone with disabilities might feel or what they might need, we need to actually ask them, and we need to talk, and we need to have that form of communication between activists and the people affected and people that actually have the power to make new policies. We need to learn and we need to talk to one another instead of just saying, oh, I'm sure that person in the wheelchair might need a ramp. Well, what kind of ramp? What's going to be included? How are we going to take care of it? So let's talk to each other. Not only do we need to encourage open-mindedness, we also need to act upon it. We need to change our attitudes, and we need to realize that it's easy to say how we're going to change the world, but it's a lot harder to do it. We realize that we need to act upon our ideas as much as we need to talk about them. So sure, discussion is important, but we also need to take action and not just assume that someone else will. Instead of saying, oh, that's a great idea, I'm behind you, but you do all the work, let's jump in there and do the work ourselves and let everyone else come on board. So altogether, we realize that as Canadians, it's our responsibility to come together and stand up for all those that can't stand up for themselves. It's our responsibility as Canadians to not only acknowledge the needs and rights of others, but also to demand that they get them. We need to demand, and we need to make noise, and we need to fight for everyone that can't fight for themselves. Thank you.
Hey, hi, I'm Sophie. I'm from Winnipeg. So our group talked a lot about how in Canada we are very vocal about our diversity, and in the US it's a lot more about assimilation and about all being the same. But we also talked about how in Canada, behind closed doors, we don't really practice what we preach. We see all our textbooks about Canadian history, and we see all these pictures of diversity and different multicultural groups. But in the end, when you really look at it, there's a lot of systematic racism with our Indigenous peoples in Canada. And we also do take in a lot of refugees, and we do have freedom of religion, but people are still discriminated against for physical diversity. And there are a lot of stigmas still against skin colors in Canada. People with Eurocentric features are still praised as more beautiful, more accepted, and more hireable. Canada needs to practice what we preach, and it is a model for other countries in doing what we say. Like, we do say we are very diverse, and I think that other countries could really learn from that, but it is the action that does need to change in Canada. We also talked about how equal does not necessarily mean fair. Equity is a much better term to use. Immigrants have different skill sets to be utilized that may not be the same kind of skill sets we want them or expect them to have. And that's okay, and there are still job opportunities for them. We just have to make those possible. We also need to recognize that immigrants do have responsibilities to their families, to themselves, and possibly to their families that are back from where they came from. And we need to find a way to bring them here by giving them more job opportunities. Job options are at a low right now in Canada, and people often find themselves these days with a degree and still no job. Creating a more attainable job market will help us grow our diverse population. These jobs must be paid above minimum wage, though. We understand that some corporations feel that they cannot afford a higher wage, but people can't afford to live without one. It is important to have immigrants in Canada and to support them with the resources they need, because often they fully realize the advantages Canadians have, which is something that those born here often do not fully recognize. If one person can change the world, imagine what all those en route to Canada can do for our country. So if removed, any one of these things referring to question 3 would make a difference. The greatest would be attitudinal boundaries. If these did not exist, more people could band together to help achieve better access to tools and technologies and appeal for fairer and more equitable laws and policies. The greatest challenge would be removing the prejudice and discrimination that often recent immigrants and even second, third generation immigrants feel today. Through teaching opportunities instead of violence and anger, we can start to educate those with closed mindsets. Once this starts being achieved, it will be far easier to convince those to donate their time, extra change, and more importantly, voices. Knowledge is power, and through knowledge comes respect. A more inclusive community looks like schools coming together to help sponsor families to come from war-torn countries, families helping new neighboring families figure out where and how they can get the resources they need, spending a morning volunteering at a shelter, donating your clothes and time to reputable resource distributors, respecting, acknowledging, and celebrating differences. Because, as was said before, we're not just Canadians here. We can be Canadians and we can be anything else. Thank you so much.
Ceci conclut la période réservée aux
So this ends the session. Thank you for all of your energy. You were always very devoted in your discussions.
Great West, the McCain Foundation, Great West Life, the Government of Nova Scotia, WestJet, and Experiences Canada, one last huge round of applause. Okay. We have 2 more things for you to do before you leave. First, we are now handing out evaluation forms about today's event. For those of you participating online, a link of the evaluation survey will be posted at the end of this session, and another one forwarded to your email. We would kindly ask you that you please take the time to fill them out. Our funders at the Department of Canadian Heritage value the opinion and feedback of participants in the program they support. And your active input will help to ensure more youth-led events and opportunities like this one happen in the future, and they continue to get better. We have included a ballot for you to complete, voting for up to 3 on-site youth participants and 3 online youth participants that will represent you all at the National Forum in Ottawa.
Tout d'abord, nous distribuons des formulaires.
We are distributing evaluation forms for those who are participating online. There is a link, or will be a link to the survey at the end of the session, and it will also be sent to your email. And we would ask you, please, to take the time to fill out this evaluation form. Secondly, we need your assistance in order to decide who will be chosen to go to Ottawa. You can vote for those you wish. For those voting online, you are going to receive a link to vote online.
Educators, volunteers, and program staff involved in the forum will determine the final selection of 37 national youth participants. We will notify successful candidates within the next 4 weeks. Please complete both the survey and the ballot before you go, and we'll collect them from you on your way out.
Je souhaite simplement rappeler.
And I would simply remind you that young people from 14 to 19 will also have an opportunity to be chosen to go to Ottawa by participating in the next forum, which will take place in Winnipeg on May 25th. www.experiencescanada.ca for all the details on the conference and live streaming on the web.
Please remember there is still one more youth forum to be held in Winnipeg on May 25th, which means there's still one more chance to earn your spot as a representative to the National Youth Forum in Ottawa. All you have to do is participate online or on-site. But whether or not you continue on to Ottawa, be proud of yourselves for the roles you've played today. Your voice matters and your actions do make a difference in ensuring Canada continues to become a more welcoming and more inclusive society, and a model for diversity for the rest of the world to follow.
Merci tout le monde pour votre
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. It was inspiring to see you all and to hear you discuss diversity and immigration here in Canada. And I hope that you're going to continue to have that type of discussion at home and in your communities. And to have your voices heard. You have every reason to be proud of yourselves for the role that you play today. Thank you also to the young people for the schools here in Nova Scotia who were able to participate. Your presence was greatly appreciated, and we'll see you soon. Hasta luego.